Good afternoon, and thanks for tuning in to our fifth session of our new Energy Works conversations. I'm Drake Ambrosino, a member of our sales team. We're thrilled you could join us today. By the way, these sessions are being recorded. They're available on our website. You can go back and watch them anytime you like. There'll be 5 of them now. Another one on its way a little later. We also have a question and answer period towards the end of this. We'll take your questions. There's a tab at the bottom of your screen, the Q&A. You can hit that. You can type in your questions and your comments. We'll do our best to address them. Our topic today is, what's it going to cost anyway? It's a complicated question, perhaps. Identifying the building costs in your project can be a little confusing. There's a lot of components to it. We hope today to offer some guide to making this manageable, to helping you achieve your design goals and staying within your budget. That's important. Joining me today are 2 key members of our team, and probably the best suited guys in our community to address this cost topic. Ty Allen. Ty is our architect. He and his design team are responsible for the great house designs that you see on our website and our projects. He also manages our construction group. And Eric Fraser, our head engineer and timber frame manager. He and his team are responsible for all the technical details about our timber frames, making sure they are of high craft and well-built structures. So a lot of detail that comes from these 2 gentlemen. Ty, let's start, if we can, with the big picture, perhaps about design, site involvement, locations around the country, how we get started in this analysis of how we cost out a project.
Well, thanks, Drake, and thanks everyone for being here. It really is the hardest question to answer in some ways in all of this process, because there's so much that goes into what makes up the cost. And so I'll touch on a few things, I guess, to get going. The things that we think about as we begin the conversations with somebody. Certainly the location of the house relative to building costs. Every location in the country has a little bit different dynamics in terms of overall building costs. And so we like to try to understand that. That's a pretty key factor in all of this. The site itself, do you have a long driveway? Do you have a short driveway? Utilities, those types of things play into it. The size of the home. Certainly smaller homes, they have a little more pressure on cost per square foot. We don't like to talk about cost per square foot a lot because it's a little bit of a misnomer. Maybe we'll touch on that later, but size plays into the house cost. And certainly complexity is another piece. Is there a ton of corners? Are there no corners? Is it a box? Things like roof shape, roof form, porches, all of these types of things that add to the overall complexity of a home. We also think about things like plan ratios. Is it a 1-to-1 ratio from the main level to the second level, or is it all spread out on one level? That certainly has an impact on cost. If you have 2,000 square foot and you've got a 2,000 square foot basement because you have a house all on one level, and a 2,000 square foot roof, that puts pressure on cost. And then of course systems, building systems, meaning what's the house made of, the wall systems, the roof systems, but also the mechanical systems. So when we start to talk about costs, yes, it really is a complicated conversation in some ways, but we start by thinking about these types of things. In the design process, these factors that we just sort of talked about, just sort of went through, those are the building blocks for not only understanding the cost, but the building blocks on which the house design is founded, and the cost will result from that, if that makes sense. So we need to have a really good handle on those factors, and if we do, then we'll set a course in the right direction for the overall goal of meeting the budget and meeting the desired expenditure. And that's the goal, right? We don't want to design things and not build them. Our clients, at the end of the day, you folks in the audience, you want to build something. And so by understanding these factors, we can get you in the right direction toward that.
So
Yeah,
you're suggesting that design is going to determine the budget and drive that budget?
Yeah, it's a sort of a reciprocal relationship. Eric, I think he wanted to chime in on something.
Yeah, no, I think what you said was good. One of the part about cost per square foot is always a fascinating conversation, and it's so hard to answer that question for all the reasons that you just said, and really more. I mean, one of the things that we do as a company is we work all over the country. So we may be working one day in South Carolina, the next day in Massachusetts, in Portland, Oregon, or Michigan. So no matter where the project is, each market has its own centralized market for construction costs. So answering the cost per square foot question is really, really tricky. I think, if we were to look back at our history, specific to timber framing, but we've probably put timber frame projects in houses that are $200 a square foot and houses that are $2,000 a square foot. And so the design piece is really what will start to narrow in on that bullseye, because trying to answer it in a blank slate is, I think, really, really difficult, and needs to be taken at a more local level as opposed to a national level.
Yeah, and Eric, I'm glad you sort of said that. I mean, probably a lot of people tuned in today thinking we were going to just tell them what a house costs per square foot and hit them right at the beginning, and then we could have made something up and we'd be done with this webinar already. But that's not really our goal here. And it is a really good point. We think about, everybody always wants to know what's the cost per square foot of your projects, and while we're not going to actually answer that question today, like I said, I think earlier, we're going to try to set you in a course where you can start to have a project that's viable. Cost per square foot is interesting in that you only ever figure out what the cost per square foot was at the end. You know what the house cost, you know what the square footage was or is, and it's simple math to understand what the cost per square foot arrived at. But it's very complex. Do you include this and not that? Do I include the dock that we built as part of the overall work on the house on the lake? Do we include the lower level, and should that be prorated? It gets really nebulous. So most people call us and reach out to us and want to talk about cost per square foot. We'd like to hear from them and try to understand, what are your project goals? What are your aspirations for the project? Where is it located? Some of the things that we just talked about. And if we can understand their expectations and then make decisions about complexity and plan ratios and systems and all of these types of things, if we can understand their expectations and what their vantage point is and what kind of resultant house they want, what their vision is for the home, then we can start to have an educated conversation about cost. And I think that's a really important thing to say. Mm-hmm. And so, Drake, you were starting to ask the question about the relationship between design and cost, and that's really everything, right? Mm-hmm. We often get calls and people ask the cost question, and I totally expect it. It makes a lot of sense. You have to sort of understand if you're in the same ballpark of conversation in terms of, is it something we can pull off as a potential homeowner. So people will ask us, and they'll try these questions, and they'll try to get a sense of, can we find some common ground? Is this going to be a viable project for us? And often what we'll tell them is that it's really hard to tell you that if there's no design. So you can't give that answer in a vacuum. And the best way to understand cost is to actually have something designed that you can respond to. And as you go through the process, whether it's with us as your designer or an outside designer, whoever might be designing the home in terms of the entire home, not just the timber frame piece, we're kind of focused on the broader scope here. You can have the kinds of conversations with them about what their expectations for cost are, but we need to understand, and they need to understand, what your expectations are. Right. And as we begin to design according to expectation, we start to have definition, and then we can respond to that by putting numbers to it. And we can do that on a really high level in terms of applying some cost per square foot type metrics to different square footages in the house. Say, for example, the main level, the basement, the garage. They all have different kind of cost rates, if you will. And so for us, for example, we've got a spreadsheet that we use where we start to plug in some numbers and try to understand in a broad sense what the range of cost might be. But we can only do that when we know the screen porch is 200 square foot and the lower level is 500 square foot and the main living level is 1,000 square foot or what have you.
So are you working from a real set of plans or maybe something simpler and less defined at that point?
So at that point, that's a great question, because when we're doing that exercise, a lot of times we're in the first half of the design process. So we're in what's called design development. So we've got enough there to understand the shape of the house, the volumes of the house, the plan areas, and really what the intent of the house is. Meaning, if we have a barn style home with 4 corners and it's it's 2 stories, let's say, with a partial loft or something like that, we'll start to know pretty quickly. And if we understand our clients' expectations in terms of finish level and that sort of thing, we'll pretty quickly understand what kinds of approximate square footage costs we should apply to the different types of areas. And we can start to begin to paint a matrix of potential cost or cost spectrum. But yeah, you're working off of what would be considered design development drawings. So you're halfway through the process, maybe not quite halfway, as far as our process is concerned internally. With outside architects and builders, everyone has a little bit different process. But when you're talking about the progression through design and when's the right time to start to get your arms around these things, it's really about that midpoint or a little bit sooner. And you might say, folks in the crowd might say or might think, well, gee, I need to know long before that. Well, that's this chicken and egg conversation. We can only give you, the information we can give you is only as good as the information we have to base it on. So we can have some high level conversations, but pretty quickly you need to understand what we're really talking about. And that requires a design effort typically. And that's how you get the best information. Our goal is to give you good information, not bad information. But there's an investment there many times.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think, Ty, just to piggyback on that, I mean, that's really a lot of my job is spent trying to solve that problem that you just painted, or that picture that you just painted. And we spend an incredible amount of time trying to answer that very question, but doing it with something real. So whether it's a DD level drawing or and sometimes it's completed construction documents, we're using that work to give a real answer. One of the things I always worry about and fear when we're having the budget conversation is giving the wrong information, right? Because you can easily send somebody down a tangent in the wrong way in a project if you shoot from the hip and give them incorrect information. So we really try to study that design, we try to study that plan, and we try to create something very tangible that can relate real dollars and real cents to, whether it be specific to the timber frame or specific to a timber frame and enclosure, so that maybe they don't know what the whole project costs, but they'll know what these 2 critical pieces of their project cost. And so sometimes that can be used as a springboard. And quite frankly, if it's done early enough in the process, that springboard can be used to continue to help drive design. So, well, design is totally critical. It's the first part the first place that we start. It's really important to have, in my opinion, real hard thought out numbers to go along with that first DD phase. And often DD is enough to do that with. I mean, it may not be perfect, but it'll get you within a really accurate percentage of what that real project would cost. So,
all right, Ty, you mentioned a spreadsheet that you use to itemize the scope of work, the site work, the house itself, the timber frame components, the things that we sell, and you're putting together a rough budget and then eventually probably an accurate budget at the end as you're going through that process. Is that only on the projects that you and your team are designing? What happens when somebody's building out of state? We're not involved in the drawings. They're coming from another source. We've got to access a builder. How do we bring those numbers together?
Yeah, that's a good thought, a good question, Drake. So when someone decides to work with us through design, we have some tools that we use to try to help understand the way that the house cost is trending throughout the process. It gets a little more intensive when we're actually the general contractor. Half of my job, or maybe sometimes more, is I oversee our construction division. And so when someone comes to us and they'd like us to be their general contractor, we not only bring them through the design process, but we try to bring them through a real design build process, which is the builder and the architect as one, builder and the designer as one, so that we can do the very things that we're talking about here. We can design, we can respond to our own internal design with some tools to help us understand costing, and then we can use that as a tool to then drive design, as Eric mentions. And it's this reciprocal chicken and egg thing that you work back and forth, and it's almost like hammering steel on a forge. Sometimes you're forming it into shape. You start out here and you're forming it into shape, and the it is the project vision, which is both the design and the cost of the project. So that's how we handle it internally. I can only imagine other design build companies probably do similar types of things. And outside architects, I'm sure that they have, because I used to be one in my life before New Energy Works, we had some tools that we use to understand cost. But it's really, and to kind of clarify the two different points of view, Eric is really mostly working with outside architects and builders on timber framing and enclosure type pricing. So he's further into the process where there's some definition to the design, overall design. I'm working with people from the start of the design process. So the way that I approach things and the things that I have to respond to are a little bit different than Eric's. But the wonderful thing is we both do a lot of different things. So we cross over and we help each other. And I work on projects that we didn't design as part of my construction tasks. So we're able to help our clients in some different types of ways, even if they're not our design clients, in a number of different ways we can help them. So what I guess to sum that up, your builder and architect should be able to help guide that process and should have some tools to help answer this question along the way.
Yeah, I want to jump in real quick because I do, as Ty mentioned, I mean, I work with independent or outside architects and builders almost all the time. I know good friends of ours, Carlton and Cami from Holmeskin Colquist. I don't know if they're listening in, but they sure will listen in. And I think often about the process that we go through when we're collaborating with them, and it's very similar. There may be a DD level set, there may be a slightly further developed set than a DD, but what they're really good at and what I think makes a lot of their projects successful is they identify really early in the process the people that they want to work with, whether that be New Energy Works as a specialty subcontractor and a local builder and a couple other specialty subcontractors. And they do a really good job of bringing those people to the table and letting the budget part of this happen with each person having a voice with their own specialty. And because of that process, they're able to be really successful on a lot of projects. And so, I mean, going back to your original question, Drake, of how does this all happen? I think as critical as it is to get the design professional on board with the budget, it's also about finding the partner, the building partner in your local market. And maybe you're not, one of the beauties is at that point, you actually don't select them necessarily for budget. You try to build a relationship with that person. Mm-hmm. And if you build it early in the design process, they'll have some ownership of the budget and you'll have some ownership of the overall project. And I think the days of bid, rebid, build, or whatever that was, those are tough. Those are tough. I mean, I think where we find success and where we really like to work is in the collaborative environment, whether that be internally or with other build professionals or design professionals. I think that's really the kind of the special sauce. And so bringing that person to the team early and letting them have a voice, the site lead or the general contractor, is, I think, really, really important.
Yeah, and I'm glad you bring that up, Eric, because we work on our projects that we design architecturally, but perform the timber frame scope on. We work with lots of outside builders, And I'll almost always say to our clients, you know what, I would start to, at the beginning of the process, start to work to pre-qualify a builder. And usually for this type of project, the type of projects that we're blessed to be involved with, they're custom, first of all, and they can be complex. And you really want to find someone that's willing to work with you throughout the process. And we're very willing to work with the builder. And I always say, hey, someone in Texas, for example, they understand how to build in Texas, someone in South Carolina or someone in Vermont.
Right.
And we do timber frames all over the country, but we're not a general contractor all over the country. And so we really want to understand what they see in terms of local building costs, detailing, which drives cost. If you draw the foundation in a way that the foundation people in that area of the country don't build, well, then you set yourself up for failure right out of the gate, or for increased costs that aren't necessary. So we'd love to do exactly what Eric says as a designer is, hey, if we're not going to be the general contractor, which is most of our projects, far and away, we want to talk with them. We want to work with them. We want their input.
Yeah.
Okay. So
with that point, Ty, I mean, it further informs your design. I mean, the last thing you want to do is design a poured foundation when the builder likes and is really good at using ICFs or something, something more local and specific to that area. And again, I think that's why, getting early involvement is critical. And also it helps just foster the relationship throughout the entire project and the entire process.
Yeah, some people are concerned. They think that the way that they're going to control costs is to get a set of drawings done, and then it's a design build methodology. We're going to give that to 5 builders or 3 builders, and whoever the lowest bidder is wins. And I agree when you say that, that way of operating, in particular with these types of homes, they're custom and they're challenging on difficult sites on the side of a mountain or wherever. That process, you may get the lowest bidder, maybe, but you probably won't get the best process. And you may find that if you choose to work with a partner throughout the process, that you can actually keep costs down in the ways that we're talking about. So,
yeah, I agree.
So the conversation that we're having sounds a little overwhelming for a starting point and a clear path. How are our viewers to begin this process in a comfortable way, and maybe what should they be bringing to the table to help us get them on that path?
So I guess I'll start with this one, Eric, if you don't mind. I think it starts with a conversation. I think it starts by give us a call, give me a call, give Eric a call, Drake a call, and let's talk about what your project expectations are. I had a conversation, I do this all the time. I have these conversations multiple times per week. Someone calls, they're trying to get their arms around what the potential costs of a project are. We chat for a while. I'm happy to talk with them. I'm happy to try to understand a little bit about their vision. And so what I'd like to say is I can't pretend we fully understand all of the things involved and all of the factors in a half-an-hour phone conversation. But what we can do is we can establish a grounds for a dialogue whereby which we can start to understand what their expectations are, what their vision is. And we've done this many times. We're not perfect, but we've done this a lot. And by listening to them talk and thinking about past projects and thinking about projects that we've worked on that might be similar, we can kind of start to triangulate on where we think their project costs might land. And this is completely instinctual. So everyone out there should understand it's almost completely instinctual. But ultimately, you need to know, again, if this is a viable project, if it's a project you're going to be able to afford to build. And we want you to understand that too. We have absolutely, like I said before, no vested interest in bringing people through a design process where it doesn't result in the thing that they're looking for. So that very open dialogue at the beginning, today, so to speak, helps us to start to understand their expectations and their visions, their vision for the project, what they expect to spend, what their finish level expectations are, and just begin to understand if they're in the same realm. And I think that's where it really starts. And once we establish, yes, we think that there's something here we can work with, together, then we start talking about the next step. And then the next step really is a design process, whether it's with us or with another architect. But I think throwing out cost per square foot numbers does a disservice to the process, and we really want to talk with you.
Yes. All right. So I want to ask two questions here
Okay.
that I hope we can address. How do we focus in on the timber frame portion? You've talked, Ty, about maybe the larger picture here. We want to talk about the timber frame portion because I'm sure people are interested in that. And if there are ratios of the major things to the overall budget, the foundation, the enclosure, the timber frame, the higher ticket items, let's call it, if there are some ratios that we should be following, perhaps.
Mm-hmm.
Eric, can you address?
I'll start, Eric, or do you want me to?
well, yeah, I can certainly address that. I mean, in a lot of ways, I don't want to beat the same drum, but the timber frame becomes really easy once there's an idea of the design. So, functionally, how we price a timber frame is we'll take that concept, whether it's fully developed, again, is in construction documents, or developed in a really rude or crude design development set. We'll take that concept, we'll actually go ahead and just build a 3D conceptual model of exactly what we're pricing and use that to inform a fixed fee proposal. So again, our interest is in providing really clear, really accurate, really tangible pricing whenever we provide pricing. Because inevitably, people remember the first number that you hear is the one that you remember. So shooting off the cuff and missing wildly is never helpful and never good. So again, we use the design to inform us on design intent. We also may take it a step further in design when we're looking specific at that timber frame piece to, again, try to create the vision and try to present real numbers around something that stands, something that we know we can build. We look at logistics, we look at engineering requirements, so on and so forth. So we pull all those things together and we try to create as fixed fee proposal as we can for our work. And usually with that, we can get into the nitty gritty and the specifics about material selection, which maybe we should do now, joinery details, curves, you name it. All these things start to impact pricing, sometimes at a really, really high level and sometimes at a pretty low level, quite frankly.
So, it makes me think about a couple of things that we've learned over the course of time. You actually can, it's very difficult because some projects are all timber frames, some have 3 pieces of timber frame in them, right? And I'm being a little extreme, but over the course of time, we've seen some things like timber framing for a full timber frame house might be in the range of maybe 18%, 15 to 20% of the overall project cost. Well, what does that tell me? Well, it puts the timber frame price in context. And so for us internally, sometimes we look at that when we're pricing a project out and we say, okay, wow, is the timber frame really expensive compared to the rest of the house? Why? And really expensive is a bad way to say it, but is it outside of that range? And so we'll look at that and we'll say, why? Well, they have a really kind of complex finish, or there's lots of curves, or something with the density of the timber number of pieces, lots of different things. But it's a metric for us. We can say, okay, yes, this makes sense. No, it doesn't make sense, but it also helps you project a little bit. I want to be careful about that. You can't really project the total cost of a project based on the timber frame costing X dollars and being assumed to be 18%, for example. But it does give you a sense, gosh, if the timber frame for this project's, I'm just going to throw out a number, $50,000, you can start to use that to paint a picture in your mind of where the rest of the project cost might be headed. But it's just one other way to look at it. We don't use it to figure things out. We just use it to understand if it's making sense within the broader context of the project. Because we can give you a timber frame price all day long, and if you don't know what the rest of the house costs, or don't have a sense of what it costs, that might actually matter to you. and you might want to know that. So it's a little tool that we use, and we know other things like the frame and enclosure could be 25 to 30% of the overall project cost. And again, I want to be careful with those numbers because every project's different, but there are things that we can use to help us understand. And I wanted to mention too that Eric actually likes to generate timber frame pricing off of napkin sketches as well. He gets lots of those.
Yeah.
Well, what you're actually identifying is not only the cost, but the value. And if somebody sees that their timber frame is slightly higher than the normal ratio, but that's something that they really value in their project and they're willing to pay for, you know, it's the leather seats in your new car as opposed to the cloth seats. If that's something that you really want, then it's a good way to identify it.
Yeah, and I often tell clients that all of this information about pricing, be it whatever part of the project, it's a tool for making decisions and choices. At the end of the day, we're trying to give our clients as much good information, as we said before, so they can make good choices. And they can also, like you say, Drake, decide what's important to them. And I'll tell you, I've been through lots of projects where we're the general contractor and we come up with the first set of numbers and client says, ooh, gosh, I might want to spend a little bit less than that, or wasn't, whatever, I wasn't anticipating some of the costs for X, fill in the blank. And we'll say, okay, great. Let's focus in on what needs to change, or let's focus in on maybe you weren't even aware that a particular piece of the project was going to cost that much. Well, let's understand why. Maybe you don't actually want that kind of countertop, and that's a silly example, but it makes you focus and it makes you really zero in on what's being designed. Because sometimes we'll present things and clients will nod their heads, and I can usually tell if they're really grasping onto what I'm saying, but there's a lot of information. So sometimes the costs make you refocus and make decisions and make really good decisions that matter to you.
Mm-hmm. One of the tools that I think is valuable is the questionnaire, the design questionnaire that we have on our website. It asks a lot of questions about the building and choices and things that become valuable to the members of the family. I always suggest that the multiple members of the family fill it out individually and then kind of compare notes. It kind of, as you point out, it sort of flushes out what's really important and drives that design, and then of course drives the budget. It's an interesting approach. It's available on our website, for your review.
Yeah, just another tool, and I'm happy to send it to anyone out there that'd like to contact me and or Drake or Eric. We can send that to you. And it's a free tool for you to use. It's not perfect. It asks a lot of questions. We use it for our design process, but certainly anyone who would like to use it to help their process that's listening in is welcome to do that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, one of the comments that you made, Ty, that I think that's really good is, you're using the budget or the pricing as a tool to make decisions based off of. we often do this with timber framing, right? There's a lot of options. You can choose fresh sawn Douglas fir, box tart, green, which is relatively inexpensive $1 per board foot, or you can choose reclaimed white oak, which is really expensive on a $1 or a cost per board foot basis. And so we're always trying to find where within that spectrum specifically the material should fall. In a typical project, the material cost might be 40 to 50% of the project. So making tweaks at the higher low level on 40 to 50% can really be impactful from a budget standpoint. The other one that's, I think, really we try to really focus on and understand is actually just the raw size of the material. We often get in projects where they're all drawn with 10 by 10s. Well, a 10 by 10 timber, let's say it's 12 foot long for simple math, is 100 board feet. That same timber is 64 board feet at 12 foot length. So you've got a 36% increase just in the cross section of that material. So we're often looking at that stuff, both from an engineering perspective, a design intent perspective, and trying to understand the budget to make those decisions. I mean, certainly there are instances and applications where, no, you really need the bigger timber. whatever, visually, structurally, it's really important. And we wouldn't encourage you to change that. But we often see, well, it's just drawn like that because this is the way we drew it. We didn't know any better. Well, those are really impactful. So when we're looking at a design, we're trying to take all those things into consideration. Because I think materials and mostly the material selection, those are the two biggest factors on a timber specific project. We also, one of the things that we're known for in the industry, and we do an awful lot of, our curves, right? On our website, you see a lot of curves. In our work, we like to do curves. We find they're a great way to express structure and space a little bit differently. The question that we always get, well, do the curves make it more expensive? Well, the reality is yes, but boy, not that much. On an overall project, you might be talking a few percentage points of an increase. And so again, I would always argue to let design drive, and maybe you pay the little bit extra for those few pieces that are curved, because it's really not overly impactful. And in the long scheme of things, in the grand scheme of things, we want design to drive. And so if the vision is that this is a curved element, or it's got a graceful arch, then that's what we want to try to execute to. And rather than trying to change the design to save a relatively low percentage. So we're always trying to understand the context of what we're doing so that we can also try to steer those things. Finishes is the other one. I mean, we've 10 or 15 years ago, we would do a lot of Douglas fir with a natural oil finish. And again, design intent and design styles have changed, and we're getting into all sorts of different textures and finishes and colors to respond to that. And so that allows us to play in a different finish or different design intent, but on a relatively lower cost base material than having to switch to something more expensive like oak. And so again, we're using this process to try to inform those decisions, to try to inform the budget so that we can inform those decisions that you're referring to. I went on a little bit of a long-winded rant there. But
it's good. I'm going to go long-winded back at you. Well, I'm always long-winded, but it makes me think of a famous graph. So you zoomed in and you were talking about materials and details and how they can have a relatively small impact when you look at the broader scope of the project. So I'm going to go back out. There's a famous graph that I saw years and years ago that I'm going to try to do it for the audience so you do it the right direction. It's a graph that kind of slopes like this. It goes down quickly and then flattens. And the bottom scale is time. And so what it tells you is that your ability in the course of a design project and design build project, your ability to affect cost decreases exponentially over time. So on the front end, to go back to the beginning of the session, you're responding to things like the site, the size, the complexity, the plan ratios, the systems, all of those things. And as you move down that curve, you're starting to make more detailed decisions, and they have a lot less cost bearing. So on the front end, if we understand your expectations about these things, being complexity, cost, etc., we can help you make really good decisions on the front end that will set that project on its best course for success. Is there any guarantee that will make the house exactly what you wanted to spend when you walked in the door? Probably not. But our goal is, again, to sort of navigate the waters together to get to a place where you're both comfortable with the design as it's transformed and evolved, and the dollars you're willing to spend. I'm going to tell a little quick story. Years ago, I designed a house for my brother, and I can't figure out if the stakes are high or low when it's your brother. I think it's a little bit of both. But he said to me at one point, he said, "Ty, are we up to our budget, or are we past our budget?" And his name's Jared, and I said, "Jared, the minute you opened your mouth and you said, 'I want to build a custom home,' you were over budget. And the rest of that process is bringing the house cost and design into concert together to something you're comfortable with." And I don't say that glibly or lightly. We take it very, very, very seriously. But that's the reality. As consumers, we're used to going and buying things off shelves. We know how much it costs. We can pick a few options and dial it right into exactly what we want. But with a custom home, it's a very, very different animal. And so, and there's a dynamic of we always want more than we really want to spend. And so what we're trying to do, I can only speak for the design process, is we're trying to get you as much house, so to speak, and that can mean a lot of things, for the dollars that you're willing to spend. And to say that that process is easy or simple or straightforward, I'd be mischaracterizing it. It's challenging, but it's a challenge that we love. And our goal and hopefully our process makes those projects as real as they can possibly be, and we can get them to their end goals we've been talking about.
Mm-hmm. So a great question has just popped up.
Sure.
If we have clients, we have a set of plans, perhaps we've detailed some of the timber framing. Now a client is out searching for a builder in whatever their location is. What's our role in communicating with that builder, in sharing responsibility for cost and explaining the process and all those details? How do we develop that and maintain that relationship? Eric, that's probably closer in your department.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. I mean, we try to be as transparent with our numbers as possible. So we're providing fixed fee information for the timber frame. A lot of times we'll package that with tongue and groove and even a prefabricated enclosure. So when we hit the site, the timber frame's erected, the walls are in place, and there's a roof shell on, and it's functionally shedding water. Mm-hmm. The budget perspective after that's again about decisions and letting selections and decisions inform the overall budget. Mm-hmm. And in some ways, unless we're responsible for the overall design, and even if we are responsible for the overall design, it's really hard for New Energy Works or anybody else to control that other than the builder and the owner or the person making those selections.
Mm-hmm. But a lot of that homework is done early on before we even get to the site. The builder and the client have an understanding of what that contract is and what the scope of work is. And we've probably been involved in that to help make sure that all of this is still a healthy project, correct?
Oh, for sure.
Yeah. I'm going to toot Eric's horn real quick. So,
oh, great.
You're welcome. No, I'm just kidding. So one of the things that I've had the opportunity to observe over time, because I'm not involved with timber frame pricing other than with our clients, but Eric and his team have, and on the East Coast and the West Coast, Justin Jaycox on the West Coast, who was part of the one of the webinars with Eric, they've developed a really nice process, the proposal process. And when they go through a proposal for a timber frame and enclosure and tongue and groove, they use graphics, they use lots of verbiage. It's a very detailed proposal and a really detailed presentation. And so, and I've actually heard clients say this back, and builders too, that, gosh, we really love, I just heard it last week, we really love how you guys put together these proposals. And that's not to toot our own horn, it's to say that we're just trying to create clarity. And Eric's done a really fantastic job over the years being very clear about what they're getting when they buy this timber frame. And I think it's an effective tool.
Yeah, and that goes along with, thanks, Ty. That goes along with giving a fixed fee proposal, right? So if it's a fixed fee proposal, we want to be really, really clear that this is the timber frame. It looks like this, it's here, it's in this space. But the other thing it does, more interestingly, is it also, again, in the absence of, say we're working with an outside architect, we actually use that process to solve a lot of problems that may be related to the timber frame and New Energy Works work specifically, but also may be related to something completely different. I mean, I think one of the things when you talk about trying to control building costs, I mean, again, this is why I go back to you build the team early and you get buy-in early. The worst thing and the most difficult part of the process is when, going back to, again, to your graph, Ty, is when you try to impact change at the end, and especially when the architect or the design professional has their construction documents done, and if you're brought into a project and you say, oh man, geez, it'd be really nice if we did this, this, and this, that gets really tough. It gets really tricky because, oh, we don't want to change the drawings and we're bidding it out this way and you want to do it one way or the other. It's really tough. But a lot of times there's a lot of value in those changes. They could simplify certain things. They could get rid of redundancy. They may make some of the logistics a lot easier on site. So part of the process and understanding the project and presenting the budget is really figuring out some of those other areas of the project that may or may not be directly related to the timber frame piece.
Yeah, and to help do that, there are times where, Eric has a network of builders all over the country that he's had an opportunity to work with. And while we don't have, builder partners like a lot of timber frame companies do, and which is very intentional, we want our relationship with builders to be founded on mutual, helping each other mutually and trust and respect. Not that those other formats don't do that, but they don't have any obligation to us, they being outside builders. And we don't necessarily have one to them other than we like to work together. And so when someone comes to us, if they don't have a builder, whether it's on the design side of things or with Eric, he gets a lot more exposure to builders. We're happy to talk about who have we worked with in your area before. And chances are we've worked with at least one person in your area. And if we have, we'll say, hey, reach out to them. I had a project a number of years ago in Virginia, and they had a few different builders that they were considering. They actually didn't come by way of us, but I went down for a site visit to get the design process started. And I got the chance to meet both potential builders and walk through their houses, but also talk about the project a little bit. And so we were able to aid in the selection process for the builder. And ultimately it was the client's decision, but sometimes we can suggest a builder. Sometimes we're happy to chat with the potential builders, and hopefully that's valuable to the process.
Mm-hmm. I want to get back to your chart a little bit. When you described the early decisions, you were probably talking about the higher end components or the bigger components of a project, the foundation, the enclosure, the timber frame, the site work. Those are the bigger ticket items. Is that how you would refer to that?
Well, I think that's going to paint a picture here. They're actually not. So we think, what are the components of the building that cost a lot? Yes, that's an important piece, but it's further down on this curve. Interestingly, what I'm really talking about at the top of the curve is how complicated is the house? How big is the house? Is it 1,000 square foot, 1,000 square foot, or 2,000 square foot all horizontally, which is more expensive? How many expensive spaces do you anticipate? Are you going to have 5 bathrooms in a 500 square foot house? Well, typically not, but if someone said that, I'd say, gosh, are you going to have a kitchen? Yes. Well, most of your house is really expensive space. Things like the overall systems that you mentioned are a little bit further down the curve, but I think it's location, it's site, because site drive costs in ways that have nothing to do with utilities and nothing to do with the driveway length. It can have everything to do with what are the views that we're trying to capture? What's the slope like? Those things will impact cost because a huge glass wall that wants to capture the most gorgeous sunset on Earth, that costs something. But if we're trying to build a passive house level home where we're going to treat daylighting in a little bit different way and use less glass, less windows, well, windows are expensive, and maybe that keeps the cost down a little bit. So it's interesting, the site impacts costs in ways beyond just what are the utilities, is it a conventional septic system or not, how long is the driveway. It actually, the site is a driver of design and therefore affects cost at a really high level.
Mm-hmm. We often hear the term sustainable building practices. Do our timber frames make our homes sustainable, or what are the other factors that play into that?
Well, I'll start if you want, Eric, and then you can jump in. I think our approach as a company overall, from our foundations of our company, so to speak, to now, are founded in how do we use materials, and I'm not want to get into this too far because Jonathan and I are going to talk about it in a couple of weeks, but we want to use systems and materials that not only promote less energy usage, but also things like carbon sequestration. And that's what wood does. And wood's a really good renewable building material. So yes, the more wood we can use, the better in many ways, but we want to use it thoughtfully. We don't want to use it wastefully either. And the systems that we put in and around our buildings, those have a cost to them, but they have costs that on the front end may be retrievable over time if you're using, for example, 50% less energy than you would in a code level home, because a lot of our homes exceed code for airtightness and insulation values and that sort of thing. So yeah, you know, I think that our practices, we're doing good things for the planet. And that's our goal.
Mm-hmm.
The other quick part to piggyback on that, and it's at New Energy Works, we have Jonathanisms, and this is probably one of my favorites of his is, you know, when we build at the highest level of quality that we can. And we do that so that we build structures that will last generations and multiple generations. And one of the things Jonathan always says is he sure hopes that nobody will ever bulldoze one of his buildings to make way for a Walmart. And in its root and in its core, that's a sustainability statement. Mm-hmm. You know, you're building things that last multiple generations. These aren't, you know, we're not trying to take you through a design process to build a house for 20 years.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And that's both about the beauty of the home, but also the quality and the integrity of the home, and bringing it back to cost. There is a cost associated with that. There certainly is. And the other part of Jonathan's statement is for the dollars you're willing to spend, right? We're going to get you the best house we possibly can for the dollars you're willing to spend. But there are places where we will simply not compromise, and that's maybe a conversation for another time.
Mm-hmm. Good. Can either of you give a forecast of where we think the cost of building materials is going to go in the next couple of years?
Nope. Except probably up.
It's up.
Well, they haven't gone back. You know, maybe they do a little of this, right? But it's like a lot of things. They do a little of this on an upward trend. The cheapest time, the old adage is the cheapest time to build is now. And for lots of reasons, you know, interest rates are low, material costs are not going down. You know, I go to Lowe's, I'm building some projects for myself. I go to Lowe's on the weekend and the guy tells me, you know, you can't find spring clamps because the supply chains are interrupted. And so that's just one little anecdotal example, but we hear of this all the time. My brother's trying to build a deck, and pressure treated materials are very scarce. Yeah. And so I don't really know what it really all really means, other than there's a strain on the system, and usually that doesn't equate cost going down.
Actually, Drake, I want to chime into that too real quick, because I'm going to take it from a little bit different perspective. You know, I will say one of the things, you know, I mostly deal in timber, so I know the timber market pretty well, and it's actually been really steady, and it's been steady for a few years. We had some increases when there were some the trade talks with Canada, because a lot of the fiber will come from Canada. So we saw some incremental increases. And those things, they do impact the timber price a little bit, but you're talking really, really, really small ratios, you know, maybe 5 cents on the cost of a board foot of timber. So it's not really that significant. When we're talking about construction, one of the costs that we really keep an eye on and are really fighting now and will continue to fight is actually labor costs.
Yeah, totally.
A good carpenter right now is hard to find, and they're worth their weight in gold. So really, it's almost about the materials, but it's really about finding good carpenters, finding a good carpentry crew, and that's more the challenge. And there's a real competitive spirit for good subcontractors right now, and you know, that's where we're seeing some cost increase.
Yeah, that's where in our general contracting work, that's where we've seen the broadest cost increase for sure.
Yeah.
Labor subcontractors.
Mm-hmm. Well, gentlemen, I think we're just about out of time. We've talked about a lot of concepts here. I want to thank both of you for joining me today. I also want to mention that our next session will be on July 16th. It's the 6th in this series. The title is This Tiny Blue-Green Pearl. We'll be talking about sustainable building practices, our responsibility to the planet, how we should perform as craftsmen, and our own high-performance building enclosures. That's an important product that we work with every day. We hope you can join us for this exciting conversation coming up on the 16th. I want to thank you all for joining in today. We hope we can be of service soon to you. We wish you the best. Stay healthy. Have a great holiday, and we'll see you in 2 weeks. Take care, John.
Thank you.
Thank you all for joining us. Bye-bye.
Hey.